If you felt over the last 2 years that it almost feels like we are living in separate realities from one another, whereby, there's science to support one idea as it relates to COVID and science to support another idea as it relates to COVID, and both can't be true at the same time, yet there's somehow evidence to support both at the same time. I mean, you wouldn't be alone in feeling that that's been going on this planet right now. And a big part of what feeds into that and how that whole thing functions is, of course, money and science and how it can be bought, but also big tech. Right? Big tech and how it can control information, how it can create censorship, how it can push certain ideas out of the discussion such that it appears that only one set of ideas is actually correct. And then there's a whole other set of people, literally in the alternative, that have an entirely different set of beliefs. So as a collective, we're not actually making sense of the same ideas. So, one of the recent things that occurred is, of course, Elon Musk trying to purchase Twitter as perhaps what it appears to be a way to try and fix that situation by ending this censorship and this control over free speech. Now, to help break this down and to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what this means and why there's hope at the end of all this is Richard Garner, media expert and a host of a Third Way podcast. Welcome, Richard. What do you got to say about this whole Elon Musk trying to take over Twitter situation?
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I mean, first of all, it was, let's not kid ourselves. For people that have felt kind of beaten down and pretty hopeless over the last couple of years and longer, it was a ray of sunshine. And again, that's not to deify Elon Musk or anything else, but it was just good to be reminded that there's hope, and we'll get into that a little more later. But what you talked about off the top, this idea of different realities, literally living in different realities. Well, that sounds obviously sci-fi, or it sounds even just theoretical. But in fact, science is now catching up with that idea. There was a study a few years back that really caught my attention at MIT. You might have heard of it. That concluded, or at least theorized, because it's really not something you can conclude when you're in the quantum world, let's say, but let's say that the results and their thinking after this particular experiment is that there is no such thing as objective reality. What? Like, you imagine for people that live and breathe on the ability to say to somebody, it's a fact. Well, it does seem right now that people are experiencing and are tuned into their own realities. Very difficult to deal with. But then when you get into this idea of free speech and misinformation and all this, you see that, no, this is actually how this works. Especially with the reaction to Elon Musk, potentially taking over Twitter. X amount of people see this as absolutely like a messiah coming in to save the day for all people who believe in free speech or just the ability to have healthy and open debates. The true sort of essence of what the internet was created to be by guys like Tim Berners-Lee, not Al Gore. Back in the day, this open source sort of a place where everybody could debate, talk, and be able to have their own ideas and share without any centralized power. Well, the people who really always aspired to see the internet fulfill that potential, well, they were thrilled. And then, as you know, there was other people who experienced an entirely different reality where for them, it was literally the apocalypse. It was the end of this guy was going to somehow mute their free speech. Ironically, something that the CEO of Twitter that replaced Jack Dorsey said, we don't really care about the free speech or the First Amendment. We care more about harm reduction and misinformation from misinformation. So they had made it very clear that was going to be what was going to drive their priorities. Now, all of a sudden, guess what they're complaining about, Joe? If Musk takes over, free speech. Like, you can't write this stuff. It's like, are you kidding me, man? Do I need to show you what you were saying like 2 weeks ago? You were saying you didn't care about this. Now you're absolutely freaked and panicked somehow about free speech. Which is it? And again, the same people that say, well, a private company, Joe or Richard, isn't bound by the First Amendment. So they can do it. Well, guess what, Joe? Those people are now freaking out saying we need protection from this monster Elon Musk. So what does that ultimately entail? Well, you could call it hypocrisy. I think there is hypocrisy there. But it also is just a reminder during this whole thing, Joe, that we really are experiencing two different realities. Like, there was a breakdown by, I can't remember the guy's name, about this basically two different perspectives on Elon Musk taking over Twitter that I think was perfect in terms of demonstrating objectively how different people see the same thing.
Yeah, it's the concept of it was Yishan, the guy who had worked previously in Reddit. He's been in big tech for a very long time, and he was basically breaking down this concept that if you're on the left, I mean, you have all the evidence of the world of the people on Twitter who are from the left, who have been, censored or have been banned or whose accounts were shut down, and they're saying, hey, we have all the evidence to say that free speech and censorship affects the left. And then you'll have the people on the right who are saying, look, we have all the evidence, we have all the case studies of all the people on the right who have been banned. I mean, look, President Trump was, Republican and he was banned. I mean, that's the ultimate, right? And so you have the evidence, you have the case studies, and you ultimately start to see that at the end of the day, both people can be correct at the same time. And I mean, maybe one is a little more correct than the other, but who could really know? And what kind of Yishan was trying to say at the end of his thread is that it seems as though big tech doesn't want to spend all their time figuring out free speech and trying to appease to all these triggered users around the social media engines. They want to spend their time building good features, but because we're at this point where we're just so triggered by everything, we are spending our time and wasting our time as big tech to try and just censor free speech. Now, with that said, I want to ask the question because a lot of detractors also brought this idea up, which was, why should we trust Elon Musk? I mean, he's a wealthy billionaire. Why should we trust him? And I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well, again, like honestly, Joe, look, if I live to be 1,000, I don't know if I'll ever be able to control the rage I have for this type of questioning all the time. A Third Way podcast is not a random title. The whole point of A Third Way was to be able to talk about not this option or that option, but to remind people there are other ways to look at things. This polarized binary, this or that, that's for computers. It's not for complex beings like us that have the ability to have nuance and different perspectives and hold two things as being right at the same. That we have that ability. Obviously, we have it. We can talk about it. But clearly, our default settings are to binary, this or that. So I don't need to believe Elon Musk is a hero. I don't need to believe he's flawless. I don't need to believe you're a hero or flawless or I'm a hero. We're human beings, Joe. We don't. So people want good guys and bad guys. That's how this narrative got broken down right away by the media. It's how the Ukraine thing got. Forget about all the whatever, good guy, bad guy. That's how we're going to process this and get the narrative out that we want. Do I trust Elon Musk? Well, I don't know. I'll just go with the precedents to this point. Yes, is he a billionaire that's accumulated billions of dollars over the years? And does that necessarily mean that he was out doing the most selfless of things the most of his life? No. Were you? Was I? No. In the end, if you look at the billionaires out there, well, Bezos, it's all about accumulation, consumption. If you look at Facebook, it's all about data, stealing, controlling, manipulating, whatever. What is Musk building? He's building rockets to the moon. He's building electric cars. Now, Neuralink, I'm not a fan of. Absolutely 100% I'm not a fan of Neuralink. But the overall point is that you have one person who seems hopeful about the human race and who's actually looking towards the future positively, optimistically. And you have a bunch of other people who have subscribed to this. We're all doomed. We're all, human beings are the virus on this planet and need to be somehow extricated from here. Otherwise, we have no hope. So I'll bet on the guy that at least believes in us, in our greatest potential as human beings, who of course is flawed, of course he wants to make money. But this play is not about money, because this is not a smart play for money. Because I could see this getting mothballed if he took it over. Let's not forget, Twitter last year, I believe, and most people don't know this. If you ask, how much money do you think Twitter made last year? I don't know, 10 billion, 20 billion, 350 million. So relative to these types of titanic social media platforms, it's nothing. And their shareholders have been panicking for years that they're not fulfilling their potential, because how are you going to get ads into Twitter and find a way to monetize? That's very difficult. But there's only 300 million users of Twitter in the world. And again, to put that in perspective, there's 3 billion people on Facebook. So what does that tell you? Twitter isn't about monetizing a mass market. It's about the controlled elite opinion of people who use Twitter. It affects government policy. It affects corporate decision making. It affects the entertainment world. It affects culture. And that's why the people who are scared of Musk coming in and allowing different narratives to come in and pollute the environment that they've already created, that the world is this way, and anybody who disagrees is not just wrong, they're not good people, they're bad, and they need to be shunned from the town square. That's what Twitter's become. So anybody that's going to come in and even attempt to be able to look at that and fix that, and also remind people, and this, I don't want to gloss over this, Joe, this is crucial. The thing that any revolution ever needs, if you go back and look at history, well, why do people rise up? They rise up when they're pushed to a point where there's no other option. But in general, people are beaten down, especially these days, the frog in the boiling water thing, over the course of longer periods of time. So that it's not enough to get everybody mobilized and to move forward on something. And then you just have a bunch of people, and you've talked to these people, they're just hopeless. They'll tell you there's no way. There is no way. It's too far gone. We can't, whatever, blah, blah, blah. Well, this was a reminder to everybody that the Tim Berners-Lee's, the guy that invented the internet, is out there working on Internet 2.0 right now and has tons of investors. Jack Dorsey, the former CEO of Twitter, is out there working with him and working on other similar reactions to what we see now. Musk, Joe Rogan, Russell Brand, Joe Martino, The Pulse. This is this is people working at different levels on the front lines, at the high levels of influence, people with money. And what I think is going to be the result of this, even if it's not a loss if Elon Musk doesn't get Twitter. In the end, I almost don't care about that. What I care about is the shot across the bow, the pushback and reminder that this is just beginning. If you think this is over, you may have won the battle. You didn't win the war. And it's going to give permission space to a lot of other people out there with money, with influence, different countries to start to say, okay, that first person went out, took a few bullets. I'm going to step up now and be reminded that, in fact, the people that agree with the importance of free speech, the importance of choice over your body long term, the importance of privacy, the importance of individual human rights, that's the vast majority of the world, Joe. That is well over 50% of people who believe those things. So in the end, it's like anything in history. You have a small group of people trying to control a large group of people. And for a long time, that works until it doesn't.
Yeah, that's well said. And, it's as simple as sometimes how many times during the course of COVID did you see, I saw this, so I'll speak for myself, but, you go in and people are wearing their masks, but then they notice somebody take theirs off. And then they're like, you know what, I'm going to take mine off. And then somebody else takes it off. Next thing you know, people are feeling more comfortable. And, this is the Musk situation. You know what? You're going to go up against big tech and try and sort of break up this massive overarching authoritarian control. Yeah, maybe I'll use some of my money and some of my influence to do the same. And yeah, maybe not all billionaires are going to do that, but some will. And I think this is what's important about us as viewers and as people who may not be those billionaires, is to recognize that just because you have a ton of money doesn't necessarily mean you're ultimately a bad person, right? And it's important to have that kind of perspective. But I feel a sense of hope. When I saw what happened with Musk there, I don't fully trust the guy entirely, but the sense is I'm going to take it day by day. I'm going to take it moment by moment, and not just have this cynical attitude towards it. So that's kind of the play I'm making, and that's what it sounds like you're saying at the end of the day as well.
I think some people, I'll use another baseball analogy. The Boston Red Sox, they had won for 100 years, whatever it was. It was called, there's this curse of the Bambino. They had traded Babe Ruth in 1903, whatever it was. And so if you knew Boston Red Sox fans over the years, they were some of the most miserable, cynical, because they just had eclipsed the ability to hope. They had been burned so many times that they didn't even want to get excited about the possibility. And they would tell you, no, we're going to mess this up somehow, some way. And then when they ultimately won and they got over the hump and they won the World Series in 2004, I believe, was it? Over the, they came back from 3-0 down against the Yankees and then won the World. It was crazy. And there were I remember interviews with Boston Red Sox fans, and they, X amount, not all, they almost didn't know what to do, Joe, because they'd become so addicted to that misery and this sort of emotion that it's hopeless, that when they were demonstrated that there was hope, they almost didn't like it. Imagine that, right? You're saying you want this thing. Well, somebody's showing you a path right now, a bit of a light at the end of the tunnel after everything we're going through, and you're going to choose to go, no, I don't think so. That might be about you.
Yeah.
Just saying.
Yeah, and I would say that to anybody watching this that wants to throw in a cynical comment. I mean, by all means do so, but take a moment, take a few deep breaths if you feel it, and think to yourself, how many moments over the last 2 years have you seen something that we could be hopeful about, and just see if you can come up with something, see if you can find something. You know, that's something I always challenge people to do, and you realize there is a lot more evidence of hopeful things than we realize, than we're being presented with. It's just we're not turning our attention to it quite as much, which is often why we become so cynical. With that said, you know, I think this was a fun breakdown, a lot to think about here. Gets a little philosophical as per usual. Appreciate your time here, Richard, and looking forward to catching you next time.
Keep up the good fight, Joe.